I haven't checked the weather, but I know it is a perfect day to chat about adult Jewish literature. I'm Cheryl Stahl. Thanks for joining me here at Nice Jewish Books. Today, I am delighted to welcome author and fellow podcaster Meryl Ain to talk about her new novel, The Shadows We Carry. Welcome, Meryl.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. So, tell me about your latest book.
Hey, my latest book is called Shadows We Carry, and it's the story of twin sisters, Bronka and JoJo Lubinsky. It begins in the late 60s, and during a time that is just filled with political and cultural turmoil. And the twins are coming of age at that time. They're students at Queens College. JoJo wants to be an actress, and Bronca wants to be a journalist. And they both face the realities of the time. There's still discrimination against women, both in getting into professional school and in pursuing a career in journalism. And JoJo has an unplanned pregnancy in the years before Roe v. Wade. These twins are very interested in their children of a Holocaust survivor, and their mother saved their father during the war, and there's this shadow, the cloud of the Holocaust over them, and they're very concerned about their lineage, and they come into contact with other characters who are as well. There's the son of a former Nazi, and there is a priest who also has a very complicated background.
Wonderful. So, and along with all those social and political changes, they have to figure out how to incorporate their Orthodox Jewish upbringing into this world. How close to their father's form was very strict, ultra-Orthodox, do they want to live? Or, how much more liberal and open do they want to be? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, as I said, it's a very complicated family background. Their father was Orthodox. And this is all dealt with in the prequel, The Takeaway Men, my first book, which you do not have to read to enjoy Shadows We Carry, but if you want to read it, that would be wonderful. So the mother saved the father's life after the Holocaust during the Kels pogrom, which took place a year after the war was over. And he married her. He never bothered to have her converted because this was right after the war, and they ended up in a DP camp. And when they arrived at the DP camp, he had her pass as Jewish. So she's been passing as Jewish her whole life. And she is a very good Jew. She does everything, but she's not technically a Jew. And the girls find out the secret. And the girls are very different, even though they're twins. So it impacts Bronka much more than JoJo. JoJo doesn't care. I mean, both girls identify as Jewish, but this bothers Bronka very much, and she really doesn't know where she fits, and she searches for this and looks for a resolution during this book.
Yeah, that was one of my questions, actually, that the twins' mother, Judy, was born Catholic, I think, right?
Right.
And she very enthusiastically embraced Judaism.
Right.
And it was so important to Aaron to have Jewish children and grandchildren is a major theme here. But why did he never push or at least encourage her to formally convert?
That's a good question. He's very complicated, as all human beings are. And I think he cared about appearances. And once she was accepted as Jewish, I think he was just too embarrassed to rock the boat. So he just kept this secret, which really ate him up. And it weighed very heavily on Bronca as well.
Yeah, one thing that I loved about your book was the
Thank you.
sisters' relationship.
Thank you.
It seems that in many books, twins are either almost exactly alike, or one is the good twin while the other is the evil twin. But Bronca and JoJo are each very much her own person, and they're very close to each other and supportive of each other.
Yes, they are. And I I had a definite reason for crafting them as twins. I am not the child of Holocaust survivors, but I've done extensive research. I've known Holocaust survivors personally. They're friends of the family. I've interviewed them. I have many friends who are 2G, and I have been doing meticulous research on this topic for many years. And one thing that I especially learned from my 2G friends was that although the cloud of the Holocaust impacts all of the children of survivors, it can impact them in very different ways. So the one thing I did not want to do in this book, because it wouldn't have been doing them justice, was paint all children of Holocaust survivors with one brushstroke. So I thought creating twins would be a good vehicle. And I do have some personal acquaintance with twins. My husband is an identical twin. And although he and his brother both had for many years exactly similar containers, as I said, you couldn't tell them apart. People didn't know who the groom was at the wedding. They gave my brother-in-law envelope. Now they don't look completely the same. They have the same health issues, they have the same tastes, but they're very, very different human beings with different values and a different character. So that gave me the idea that telling this story using twins would be a good idea, and that indeed all human beings are very different. And I made them fraternal twins, so they're even more different, more like siblings.
Right, absolutely. It sounds like you would come down more on the nature side of nature versus nurture, because both of them grew up in the exact same household, and yet Bronca, I don't want to say she internalized her father's anxiety and depression. They both did, but she expressed it. She acknowledged um, this shadow that the family had, while JoJo felt like she always had to show a cheerful face and didn't really acknowledge, not I mean, she acknowledged it but didn't emotionally acknowledge
Right,
the
right.
family trauma.
Until it caught up with her a little bit.
Right, yes. Yeah, that definitely got in the way of her having a relationship with, well, her boyfriend and then husband Bruce, because she just
Yeah.
wasn't used to sharing her troubles. She didn't know how to express them.
So I do think that, as I said, I think the experience of being a child of a Holocaust, from what I've studied and learned from my friends, it does impact people very deeply in different ways. I would come down probably on nature with that. However, that was one of the, I'm glad you mentioned it, because that was one of the overall questions I wanted to raise in the book, the whole question of nature versus nurture, because we had the Catholic priest who was given away as an infant by his Jewish parents during the Holocaust. And then we have the son of the former Nazi who's grappling with the question, am I responsible for my father's misdeeds? And I left that open-ended. I mean, that's totally for the reader to decide. And I think that's such an important question and an interesting question. And I don't really know whether we're ever going to come up with a satisfactory answer to it, but it's nice to talk about.
Yeah, and maybe it isn't ironic, but Brian's father had been a good father to him. He had done horrific things during the Holocaust, and then seemed to settle into, a happy family situation.
That's a question that's the eternal question, would people who if these same people who were really monsters, when they became Nazis, how would they have been if there had never been a war, if there had never been a Hitler? Would they have just, lived a normal life and been shopkeepers and gone home to their family? But they had this in them, or, the more disturbing question is, do we all have this in him? And then the bigger question I wanted to raise is, who's responsible? I mean, who is responsible for this? The fact that, although Judy was a righteous Gentile and she did save him, and there were many righteous Gentiles by comparison to the number of Jews who were murdered. It's just a tiny sliver. So I think this is an eternal question that we face.
Yeah, and just, back to Brian, can you continue to love and respect someone when you find out this new knowledge about them? And, it totally shatters him to find out, his father's past. And one thing that brought it up was that as a photographer, reporter, he saw him in a neo-Nazi activity. uh, so
That's a nice activity. Yes, that's a no, they were changing. It was Bronca was going to cover, it was a street
oh, that's right.
name changing for a street, because I mean, I based this on an actual community out on Long Island. I called it Fatherland Gardens. The real name of it, and it still exists, is German Gardens, although they've gotten rid of all the Nazi names. The main street was Adolf Hitler's Strasse, and they had all these names of Nazis as street names, and they also housed a Nazi youth camp prior to World War II, which indoctrinated young people into Nazi values. So to me, also the question is, well, what if he had just sort of grown up and knowing, yeah, my father was German, he was in the war. I don't know if he had been desensitized to it in some way, but it just came as such a shock because he just knew his father as a good father, which he was. And that raises the question of, we all have a good side and an evil side, and what brings it up? It's very frightening.
And it seems obvious to us now that people who had been active Nazis in World War II should be prosecuted, but that wasn't the case in the years after the war. So why was that, and when did tracking down and prosecuting Nazis become a thing?
Yeah, I deal with that in the book. So the truth is that after World War II, everybody just wanted to celebrate. The country was tired of war, and the GIs wanted to go home, get married, have a family, pursue a career, buy a house, and just resume normal life. The government was not interested, and this is a dirty little secret that's not really a secret. The minute the war was over, the US government changed its focus to hunting down communists instead of Nazis. And the whole weight of the government was focused on that. We all know about the Julius and Ethel Rosenberg spy trial, where the Rosenbergs were executed in the early 50s. So there was a communist witch hunt, and everybody just forgot about Nazis. And it's even worse than that, because the United States invited former Nazis. Everybody knows Werner von Braun, who came to work in the space program. They had many former Nazis work in the space program and work at Los Alamos, developing the atomic energy. So the U.S. government just looked the other way. So then we go through, we had the Eichmann trial in 61, and that raised awareness somewhat. But I would say, and this is in the book, that the watershed moment was when NBC did a mini series called The Holocaust or The Holocaust in the late 70s. And I think it was on 4 nights, and the country was riveted to this. And after this, the word Holocaust and the word survivor became part of our lexicon. Before that, people didn't talk about survivors, and they didn't talk about the Holocaust either. And then Steven Spielberg got involved with Schindler's List. That was later. That was in the early 90s. But in the Shoah Foundation, there was much more interest, and survivors started coming out of the shadows, because originally some of them were embarrassed, and Americans said, like, why didn't you fight back? Why did you, they lived with a lot of shame. They started coming out. You had Holocaust centers created, and they started speaking to schools. And then Elizabeth Holtzman really spearheaded this in the United States Congress in the late 70s, and the Office of Special Investigations under the Department of Justice was established, I believe, in 1979. And then that office went gung-ho in rooting out former Nazis and holding them accountable, and in many cases deporting them.
Let me change the topic slightly. You had mentioned the Kels pogrom,
Right.
which I don't think I had heard of, and this occurred after the war ended?
It did. And it's interesting because I hadn't heard of it either. So when I was writing The Takeaway Men, I had a big decision to make. What all authors do. Where are your characters coming from, and where are they going to? So the going to was easy. I just made them come to my own community, because they say you should write what you know. But where were they going to come from? So I thought about it. Germany's been overdone, and France, and Holland is Anne Frank. And I kind of settled on Poland, but I didn't know where in Poland, because I needed there to be ghetto there. I needed there to be a forest there. And one summer, my husband Stuart and I went to the Berkshires, and they have a Jewish film festival there. And we saw a film called Bogdan's Journey, which was about the Kels pogrom. And this young man who currently lives in Kels went back to Kels and interviewed people there about what they knew about it, and what their feelings were about it. And I said, okay, it has to be Kels. And then I started researching it, and I actually found a treasure trove of material. So I had them come to Kels, but from Kels. But it happened after the war on July 4th, 1946. And there was a Jewish community center there that was housing refugees from the Holocaust before they were going to be sent to other places. They were housed there. And a young boy made up a story. He wanted to go back to his old neighborhood because the neighbor had cherry trees. He wanted to pick the cherries. His parents discovered he was missing. They were upset. They looked for him. He came home. And when they asked him what happened, he just made up a total lie that a Jewish man had kidnapped him. And the community, civilians, police officers, and soldiers stormed the place. They dragged Jews out of there, and they shot some of them. They beat them to death. And there were, several I don't remember the exact figure, but I want to say maybe uh, over 100 probably killed and injured, which to me was raised all sorts of other questions. How could this have happened a year after the war in Europe was over?
Hmm.
And so I found that very, very scary.
And I think in general, what a lot of people don't realize is that the war wasn't over when the war ended. That the soldiers went home, but for the Jews, there was no home to go home to for the most part. And, they were stuck in these displaced persons camps and, really had a tough time starting their lives again.
I mean, that was one of the main reasons I chose to set the book in the post-Holocaust era, because I mean, there are other books set in that era, but there are, the best-selling category on Amazon is Holocaust novels, and they end and either the characters are murdered, or they go on to new lives. But I wanted to show the complexities of what happened to these survivors and their families after the war was over, because it was not easy for them. They didn't speak the language. There weren't the support services that there are nowadays. They just, and many of them, as I said before, were shamed, and so they just kind of kept to themselves, and they kept their secrets bottled up at that time, right after the war.
So let's switch back to a happier moment for your characters. When Johanna, JoJo, gives birth, her father finally has some happiness in his life again. This shadow doesn't disappear, but for the moment it's it's pushed aside. When he's able to hold his grandson, and feels it as a direct response to Hitler, that there's this another Jew that's living in the world.
Right. He does. He overlooks the fact, as he did with his own children, that the child is not technically Jewish. I mean, Aaron is, I guess, like many people, he just makes up his own rules. Uh, but he is thrilled. And even though he was very, very angry with JoJo when she got pregnant by accident, and you know she got married right away, which is, they're kind of what many people did in those days. And he was furious with her. He said, "You brought shame on this family, and you'll be the death of me." He was horrified, and as soon as the baby was born, he was fine with it. But actually, I think that that's more typical than not, because what grandparent's heart is not melted by a beautiful baby?
Very true. So both JoJo and Bronka have kind of their dreams deferred. That JoJo had to give up her pursuit of acting to raise her children, and Bronka is kind of stuck on the women's track in journalism, doing cooking a cooking column in which she had no interest to begin with, although she does start to enjoy it, but that's not her goal. She wants to do serious journalism. So they each do persevere, though. And so I do like the message that even if you can't reach your goal right this minute, it could happen a little bit later or a lot later, to keep working towards it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is the case. It's a case for everyone. I mean, young people today, they say they will not stay in one job forever. They'll have 4 or 5 jobs. But it's certainly the case for baby boomers, which they are, that the times changed and there were more opportunities to reinvent yourself in different ways. So, at the time in which they grew up, I think about, I mean, certainly Elizabeth Holtzman was very unusual, a woman in Congress, and Barbara Walters, a woman on TV, was incredibly different. She was the only one. So there were few, and then of course, Title IX was passed. There was legislation, and things changed. So things always change. So I guess people should have hope and always be receptive to change and realize that they can reinvent themselves many times.
You mentioned your research several times. Was there anything in your research that surprised you?
Well, I think we covered the certainly the Kels pogrom surprised me, and certainly the fact that they didn't do anything about Nazis. And also certainly that there was this community out on Long Island. I live on Long Island. I did not know about this community, German Gardens, and in fact, it wasn't until 2017 where they got rid of the requirement that you had to prove German lineage to live there. New York State
Wow.
put a stop to it. But there is, and we're talking in a time where there is a rising surge of anti-Semitism. So it's been there. It never went away, and it's rearing its ugly head again.
You said 2017, just a few years ago.
Yeah, yes.
Amazing. So, do you have any projects in the works that you would like to mention?
Well, it's sort of in its embryonic form. My mother joined the Women's Army Corps, the WAC, during World War II. She had seen a film about Hitler, and she enlisted days after she graduated from college. And when she was 80, she wrote a memoir of her life, which was never published. So I'm reading the memoir now. I like to do something with it. I think I might want to fictionalize it, but I have to tell you, it's very emotional. It's very emotional. So I've taken it, I've written some chapters, I'm going back and looking at it, and of course I'm very busy now with this book, but that is what I would like to do.
That sounds wonderful. What a beautiful tribute to your mom to be working on that.
Thank you.
So, is there anything that you would like to answer that I haven't thought to ask?
Just that I love to speak to groups, organizations, book clubs. If you I'm happy to, if it's local, I can come in person, or I'm happy to Zoom in.
Okay, great. So I like to give all my guests an opportunity for a soapbox moment. So if you would like to use your book or anything at all as a call to action for Tikkun Olam, for repairing the world, what would it be?
Okay, well, I actually have two thoughts on that topic. So the first thought is just, one of the themes from my book, who's responsible? And I think that I certainly have come to the conclusion that we are all responsible. So we certainly have to speak out when we see evil, and it's certainly part of our Jewish heritage to help those who are less fortunate. My other particular area of interest is obviously Holocaust survivors and their families. I'm on the International Advisory Board for Holocaust Survivor Day, which is taking place this year on June 4th. So I just think that people that the number of Holocaust survivors are dwindling, so it's important to remember them and honor them, and a number of them are in need, and they can be helped by many organizations, including UJA Federation.
Wonderful, thank you. And If people would like to contact you for a book club or reading or for any reason, what would be the best way?
You can contact me through my website, merylain.com. And
So that's MERYLAIN.
right. And I'm on Facebook. I started a Facebook group called Jews Love to Read, and we have almost 4,000 members, and it's a very wonderful, eclectic group of people from all over the world. So if you'd like to join us there, please do.
Yeah, I'm actually a member of that group and have definitely enjoyed it.
I know you are, Cheryl, and we post your podcasts on
which I very much appreciate.
Yeah.
So, Meryl Ain, thank you so much for being here, speaking with me about the shadows we carry.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. It's been great.
If you are interested in any of the books we discussed today, you can find them at your favorite board and brick or online bookstore or at your local library. Thanks to Dianki for use of his Freilich, which definitely makes me happy. This podcast is a project of the Association of Jewish Libraries, and you can find more about it at www.jewishlibraries.org/nicejewishbooks. I would like to thank AJL and my podcast mentor, Heidi Rabinowitz. Keep listening for the promo for her latest episode.
This is AJ Sass, author of Ellen Outside the Lines. I'll be joining you soon on the Book of Life podcast. I'd like to dedicate my episode to advocates against censorship, the folks who push back against book bans and other attempts to silence marginalized voices. Your efforts are needed and so very much appreciated.
The Book of Life is the sister podcast of Nice Jewish Books. I'm your host, Heidi Rabinowitz, and I podcast about Jewish Kidlit. Join me to hear my June 2023 conversation with Andrew Sass about Ellen Outside the Lines and other books.